At the turn of the 20th century, when the frontier was closing and the Indian Territory was being swallowed into the new state of Oklahoma, one man stood tall against the tide. His name was Chitto Harjo, though the newspapers called him Crazy Snake. To the U.S. government, he was an outlaw. To his Creek people, he was a voice of resistance, a man unwilling to surrender their sovereignty, their lands, or their way of life. His defiance would ignite the last great Indian rebellion in Oklahoma, ending in blood and tragedy. Roots of a fighter, Chitto Harjo was born in the Creek Nation around 1846, a time when his people were still healing from the Trail of Tears. His family carried the memory of forced removal from their ancestral homelands in the southeast, marched west under U.S. bayonets. Growing up, Harjo learned the traditional ways, speaking Creek, following ceremonial practices, and cherishing the independence his nation had fought to preserve. But after the Civil War, the government tightened its grip on Indian territory. Treaties were broken, railroads carved up the land, and most devastating of all came the Allotment Act of 1887, which sought to dissolve tribal land into private parcels. To many natives, allotment meant the destruction of their communal life, their government, their very identity. And to Chitto Harjo, it was nothing short of betrayal. Crazy Snake's stand in the 1890s, as allotment rolled into the Creek Nation, Harjo emerged as a leader of resistance. He spoke at council fires, urging his people not to sign away their land. He declared that Creek laws still stood, no matter what Washington decreed. The government branded him a radical. Settlers and newspapers sneered, calling him Crazy Snake. But among his followers, he was seen as a warrior for justice. He organized what came to be called the Crazy Snake Rebellion, a movement of Creek citizens who refused allotment, who clung to the old ways, and who were willing to fight rather than bow to federal control. The Snake Movement. The so-called Snake Band was not an army in the traditional sense. It was a gathering of Creek families, men and women who resisted selling their allotments and who tried to uphold Creek courts instead of federal ones. They patrolled their communities, sometimes clashing with Creek citizens who cooperated with allotment. To Washington, these acts looked like rebellion. To the people, they were acts of survival. The movement grew, spreading anxiety across Indian territory. White settlers demanded action, and soon U.S. Marshals were dispatched to crush the snakes. The rebellion ignites. In 1901, violence erupted. Harjo and his followers were confronted by deputies near Hickory Ground. Gunfire broke out. Men were killed, and the government responded with overwhelming force. The newspapers screamed of Indian uprisings, painting Harjo as a savage war chief bent on slaughter. But the truth was far less grand. The rebellion was poorly armed, scattered, and more symbolic than strategic. Still, the resistance continued into the early 1900s. Small skirmishes flared. Families loyal to Harjo were harassed, beaten, even jailed. But the Snake Movement held fast, refusing to recognize the end of Creek sovereignty. The last stand, by 1909, Oklahoma was no longer Indian territory, it was a state. Tribal governments had been dismantled. Allotment was nearly complete. But Harjo, now in his 60s, still refused to yield. That year, federal agents and local lawmen tracked him down. Accounts differ. Some say he was cornered at his home. Others claim he was ambushed in the woods. What is certain is that gunfire erupted, and Chitto Harjo, the defiant Crazy Snake, was shot and killed. His body was left as a warning. Resistance to federal law would not be tolerated. Legacy of the Crazy Snake Rebellion. Though crushed, the Snake Rebellion left its mark. It was the last organized armed resistance of Native people in Oklahoma, a final stand against allotment, against assimilation, against the destruction of sovereignty. To the U.S., Harjo was an outlaw, a dangerous agitator who threatened law and order. But to his people, he was something more. He was a man who refused to forget, a man who carried the memory of the old Creek Nation to his dying breath. Today, historians remember the Crazy Snake Movement not as a failed uprising, but as a testament to the courage of a people unwilling to vanish quietly. The killing of Crazy Snake marked the end of an era. With his death, the last embers of armed Native resistance in Oklahoma flickered out, but his spirit remains in the stories told across Creek country. Stories of a leader who would not bow, who was branded a madman for daring to resist, and who proved, until his final breath, that the fight for sovereignty never truly dies. This was the story of Chitto Harjo, Crazy Snake, the outlaw, the patriot, the last great rebel of Indian territory.